Hi, everybody. Please let me know, somebody let me know that you can hear me. Welcome on behalf of the CNPS, California Native Plant Society, Redbud chapter of Nevada and Placer counties. We are so glad that you could join us for this really special program, which is Beauty and the Beast, California Wildflowers and Climate Change. Our presenters this evening are Rob Winter and Nita Badger. We'll talk more in a few minutes about the program and introduce Rob and Nita. Meanwhile, Nita would love for any of you who would like to share in the chat where you're from. That gives our presenters more of a sense of where the California wildflowers might be near you. Okay. So meanwhile, let me say my name is Chrissy Freeman. I'm the publicity chair for the Redbud chapter. And I wanted to welcome you and say just a few words about the Redbud chapter for those of you who might not be familiar with the Redbud chapter. And so the Redbud chapter covers Nevada County and quite a bit of Placer County. So we are from like 1,200 feet to well over 4,000 feet. And we are an all-volunteer organization, as those who know. Western Nevada, Placer and Nevada counties are on the western slope of the Sierra Nevada mountain range between Sacramento and Tahoe. And 35% of the vascular plants in California are found in just our geographic area. It is stunning. And that's that elevation change that, of course, contributes so much to that. So as with all of CNPS, we are dedicated to increasing the understanding and appreciation of California's native plants and to preserving them and their natural habitat for future generations. So we offer programs and activities in science, in conservation advocacy, in native plant education, in education for school children about native plants and habitats, and in horticulture. We also, of course, have native plant sales, in which we try as the propagation group, we focus primarily on locally native plants. We have research written and published 2 definitive guides covering over 700 wildflowers, shrubs, and trees of our 2 counties. So you can find those on our website and purchase them from the CNPS store. So we would like now, we're going to get started on our program. So if you have questions as we proceed, please put your questions into the chat, and we'll make sure that when Rob and Nita have finished their presentation, that will facilitate making sure that your questions get asked and Rob and Nita have a chance to respond to them. We have definitely muted everybody, and we are conserving bandwidth and embarrassment by not enabling video for the people who are in the audience. But we'll be able to see Rob and Nita's slides in just a few minutes. So without further ado, Rob and Nita, you can share your screen and I'll introduce you as people see that. Yes. Okay. So internationally acclaimed conservation photographers Rob Badger and Nita Winter. They've been life partners, activists, and creative collaborators for more than 3 decades. Doesn't that sound fabulous? What we really want to know, Nita and Rob, is how have you pulled that off? Anyway. So Rob's environmental images have won multiple awards, including Best in Photojournalism in international competition. He was one of 3 American photographers chosen to document Russian nature preserves in Siberia. In 1998, he presented a slideshow documenting the impact of mining on our public lands at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. for the Sierra Club to support the Clinton administration's efforts to reform the antiquated 1872 mining law. We can use you making sure that the local mine efforts are also defeated here in this county. Nita began her photographic career documenting her work fighting wildfires in Northern California, and later as, later as a national park ranger on Alcatraz. In 1986, Nita had her first major exhibit, The Children of the Tenderloin. This documentary project launched her career and directed her focus towards creating healthy communities. The series received extensive media coverage and showed her firsthand the power of photographic storytelling. Over the next 17 years, she produced and created portraits for 6 major public art projects celebrating the Bay Area's diverse communities. Their work has been featured in Time, Mother Jones, and Sierra magazines, the New York Times, Washington Post, San Francisco Chronicle, and Los Angeles Times. They are the recent recipients of the Sierra Club's 2020 Ansel Adams Award for Conservation Photography. So now, Nita and Rob are excited to take you behind the scenes on their 27-year journey photographing wildflowers throughout California and the West, and the making of their book, Beauty and the Beast, California Wildflowers and Climate Change. Thank you, Nita and Rob.
Well, good evening. It's so nice to see so many of you here. It's nice, also interesting to see in the chat where so many people are from. We see someone from Santa Monica and that far down. So hope you had a nice trip driving up
to watch us. And thank you, Chrissy, for such a wonderful and enthusiastic introduction.
Yeah,
I truly appreciate it.
Right. Thank you. So as Chrissy said, we want to take you on our 27-year journey photographing wildflowers of the West on our public lands. And I want to emphasize public lands because almost everything we did was on our public lands except for a few places, and we'll talk about that later.
And the project resulted in the book and a traveling exhibit, and we'll tell you more about that. And the book itself has won 12 awards, so we were very excited about that. So we will take you on our journey.
And we want to emphasize the fact that the book was co-published with the California Native Plant Society. We independently published the book with CNPS, so we would have complete control over all the content in the book and how it was presented.
And it was a very collaborative project. As Rob mentioned, we co-published with CNPS. We also couldn't have done the work that we did in the field without the different chapters and members of the chapters helping us find flowers and find the right places to go at the right time, since this is such a huge state. And we also wanted to give the voices, a diverse group of voices to wildflowers. And so, as you can see here, there's quite a range of organizations that we've worked with. For those of you who may need to leave early, you can learn more at wildflowerbooks.com. We have the book for sale there. You can also see videos, recording of our talk we gave not too long ago to the California Historical Society, and then also Redbud chapters recording tonight, so they will make it available as well. And you can also reach us through that website.
So this all began in 1992. I was at a film lab in San Francisco processing some nature photography I had done in part of the state, and I came across a friend of mine, Liz Hymans, and she said, you know, the Antelope Valley California Poppy Reserve is having a really, really good year after 6 years of drought. She said, you know, you're a landscape photographer in California. I'm sure you've been to the Poppy Reserve many times, seen the beautiful floral display there in the state park. And I said kind of sheepishly, well, you know, no, I've just never really been there. And she looked at me in surprise and said, really? Well, we have to go. We have to go soon. So she and a friend of ours, a day later, and I went down to the Antelope Valley California Poppy Reserve, which many of you may know, it's just about an hour's drive northeast from Los Angeles in the westernmost extension of the Mojave Desert. And so what we came across was this amazing, diverse floral landscape. There were so many different flowers there. We've, Nita and I have been to the Poppy Reserve since, and often you'll see this beautiful display of flowers, but it will be almost exclusively California poppies. So what made this year so very interesting was, like I said, the diversity of flowers. You see these beautiful purple-tipped bird's eye gilia flowers that are interspersed within the orange poppies. And what made this really, really interesting to be there was the fact that we watched these waves of wind coming out of the desert going west, these waves moving across this expansive field of flowers. It was just so hypnotic. You'd see the flowers moving. It was just this dynamic, changing landscape. So I called Nita that evening and I said, sweetie, you really, really have to see this. You and I have never seen anything like this before. I have no idea how long this is going to last, because if it heats up and dries out, the flowers will be gone soon. So after doing some more photography for another day, drove back north to San Francisco to get Nita, and then we came back down and photographed in the Poppy Reserve and out beyond the Poppy Reserve in BLM land for the next couple days.
And I was a people photographer at the time, so I was on an assignment and couldn't go down with them initially. But I was so grateful that Rob came back and got me. And we both had grown up in New England and New York area, and we had never seen anything like this before. So once we saw this, we were hooked. We had to go chase wildflowers for the next 27, 30 years. Rob and I met in the photo lab. I was waiting for my prints, and this wonderful prince showed up. And
thank you, sweetie.
We've been together for 36 years. And as I mentioned, I was a people photographer at the time, and Rob was focusing mostly on nature and creating beautiful pictures of nature. Over the years, we decided to start to collaborate full-time on photographing the wildflowers. And Chrissy, if you want to know how we managed to stay together that long and work together, we had 5.5 couples counselors that helped us along.
So one of the frequent questions we get asked is, well, how far back do these floral images go? Well, this was taken when I was using film in 1984. I was looking for a landscape with a beautiful California buckeye tree, and I came across this landscape east of Carmel, and I noticed there were these pretty purple flowers in there, which I didn't know at the time what they were. And I said, well, you know, this would make a nice addition to this whole landscape scene. So the earliest image was done in film in 1984, 2 years before I met Nita. And as Nita mentioned, when she met me, I had been already photographing in California for about 25 years, doing a lot of beautiful landscape work. And after building up quite a portfolio of work, I was wondering, well, what is there more than just, you know, what is there more to do with my work than just get pretty pictures in calendars or postcards or things like that. So Nita suggested, well, why don't you contact the Trust for Public Land? It's a national land conservation organization, and perhaps they need photographers to photograph their different projects. So I did. I showed them my portfolio, and over the years, I was fortunate to do over 30 projects for TPL that ranged throughout the West, Hawaii, and Colorado, and things like that. This is an example of one of the projects that I photographed. This was previously privately held ranch land adjacent to Sequoia National Park, that the park had decided had some great ecological value because of the plant diversity there. So TPL was able to purchase the land and hold it until the Park Service could buy it. So this was eventually conveyed into the national park system. I had also, after meeting Nita, started doing different environmental projects. This was a project I did on mining on public land that Chrissy mentioned in the introduction, trying to get mining law reform through for the 1872 mining law. I'd also been photographing logging issues and mining issues, and water issues. And after doing that for about 10 or 15 years, it became very, very depressing to go to all these scenes and see this devastation. So I decided I was just going to use the work I had, the beautiful nature images, to see what I could do to promote land conservation. And
as Chrissy mentioned, I became a firefighter up in Leggett, northern Mendocino County. And when I came out from going to school in Massachusetts, I got my degree in biology. I decided to give firefighting a try, and also gave tours on Alcatraz and worked at Lake Berryessa. But then I decided to come back to San Francisco and did a project on the children of the Tenderloin, which launched my career creating healthy communities. I also photographed for the Children's Defense Fund. This was for their calendars. It was hand colored by a wonderful artist, Taya Schrack. And this was a powwow that was actually in San Francisco. On the right is a banner, a 7-foot banner that was part of a number of series I did on different communities that celebrated diversity, both ethnic diversity, age diversity, sexual preference, etc. And I started spending more time outside photographing with Rob because I was having some health issues that were affecting my memory, and it was more difficult to do the people photography. So we would go out together a lot more because my schedule opened up. And this is Carson Pass, Winnemucca Lake up in Carson Pass.
And so we were photographing here. We chose this area to photograph, to do landscape and to do floral portrait work, because we were told that this was an area where different bioregions converged. So what that meant to us was there would be a greater diversity of wildflower species in a smaller area. Normally, our wildflower photography is done during day trips, day hikes. So we weren't doing a lot of backpacking photographing the flowers, but we decided that in order to spend as much time in this area and cut out the time hiking back and forth for a few days to this spot, we decided we would backpack in there. So at this time, I was carrying about 85 pounds of gear, which was camping gear, our natural light equipment studio that we'll talk about later, and camera gear. And Nita was carrying, you were carrying what, 65 pounds in there. So it allowed us to stay in that area for a few days and saved us a lot of time, and we got a lot of images.
And I said I wasn't going to do that again.
Me too.
65 pounds was too much. Rob normally would carry 65 pounds of equipment, and I would be more like 20, 25 pounds. And what was interesting about this trip is this is actually after Labor Day. And the reason we were out so late was because there was so much snow, like this year, or this year will probably be even more snow, that the flowers were 3 to 4 weeks late up in the subalpine and alpine areas. So this is after Labor Day and the flowers were still out. And in order to be able to pay for the work we were doing, we were fortunate to connect with art consultants and architects who were using our images and our fine art prints in medical facilities. And this lobby divider is 8 feet tall by 20 feet wide and was one of 34 images built into the Redwood City Medical Center.
So I found a way to interpret some of the wildflowers' beauty that was different from the standard everything in sharp focus botanical portraits that we'll talk about later when we take you behind the scenes. This is an example of the contact series, and I'll tell you how we got flowers gently in contact with the front of the lens to create a different, more artistic interpretation of the wildflower's beauty.
And it is really fun to see your work that big. And we've found that we can find flowers in the Bay Area 12 months of the year, but there aren't very many in the winter time. So we like to go out when we can. So this is Woodbridge Preserve, Ecological Preserve near Lodi, and places like the Merced National Wildlife Refuge to photograph birds. And these images were also used in our hospital projects. And sometimes the birds come to us. We were out photographing sea daisies on a bluff over San Gregorio Beach, and this young red-tailed hawk was checking us out. And this is not a telephoto lens. I might have even had the 50 millimeter. So he was just cruising right over our heads, which was really fun.
Because we spend so much time photographing individual flowers in the field, we get to really be immersed into where we are and see things like birds and hawks and insects as we're photographing. The most frequent question we get asked is, well, you've seen a lot of superblooms, you've photographed a lot of them. Do you have a favorite superbloom? And yes, we definitely do. In 2003, actually, that was just about 20 years ago, almost to the date, there was an amazing and truly amazing superbloom above the town of Gorman, where Interstate 5 goes through from LA up over the top of the Grapevine down into the San Joaquin Valley. From the bottom of the freeway to the top of the ridge in this area, and about 1.5 miles wide, was just completely covered with flowers. And this is a ground detail that I took that was pretty close to the freeway. So it was just amazing to see so many flowers in so many different colors, just completely covering the landscape. And I'd been driving up and down there since 1966, and I'd never, ever seen anything like this. So this was our most just mesmerizing, I don't know how else to describe it, the most beautiful superbloom we've ever seen in 30 years of wildflower photography.
And we were really fortunate because the west side of the freeway up in the hills was the Hungry Valley State Vehicular Recreation Area, which had a dirt road that we could climb up into the hills and look across to what is now private land, but we hope someday will be protected. So Highway 5 goes down in between these two hills.
So you're looking east into the Tehachapi Mountains. And what made this so interesting, and also what sort of challenging to photograph, was the fact that we got there at the tail end of a late spring storm, and well, actually at the tail end of a mid-spring storm, like we've seen here recently. And as the storm cleared, all these beautiful shafts of light were moving across the landscape. In the background were these deep gray clouds that were dissipating. So the landscape we were looking at was changing as the light was changing. So it made it not only challenging to photograph, but really, really exciting to photograph.
Our second favorite super bloom was in Carrizo Plain in 2017. And we are coming over the Tembler Mountains from Bakersfield down into the plain. And what was really interesting about this photograph was on the left side is your south-facing slope, and on the right side is your north-facing slope. Interesting to see what grows on each slope. And we know a lot of people have been heading down to Carrizo Plain this year. This is on the west side. This is the Caliente Mountains. And we had been photographing for 20-something years, and we had actually never seen a desert candle until this trip. And here were tens of thousands of them in front of us.
And I recently looked at an iPhone video that I did of this scene, and I remembered that there was also a breeze across this landscape, and we just stood there again and watched these beautiful flowers swaying in the wind. It was another really hypnotic wildflower landscape experience that we were really, really fortunate to photograph.
And this is the Caliente Mountains, in case I didn't mention that.
Another favorite photo, another frequent photograph. Thank you. Another frequent question we get asked is, do you have a favorite or favorite wildflowers? And yes, I do. This desert candle is one of my very, very favorites. It's a member of the mustard family. You can see it's probably about 2.5 feet tall. What makes this so interesting to me is the fact that at the top of this hollow yellow stem is this nice collection of deep magenta buds. And as the buds open, they reveal these very, very delicate white wildflowers. So with the light coming from behind this long, tall stalk, the light makes this stalk just glow. And then at the bottom are these beautiful green lance-shaped leaves. So this is why this is one of our favorite one of our favorite wildflowers.
And this is the view looking back towards the Tembler Mountains, looking east towards Bakersfield. And this is the plain, the northern end of the plain, coming off of the Caliente Mountains. And this was a close-up done down in the plains, and this was done with my iPhone 6 and is actually in the book. And we realized that over the 27 years, we used 12 different cameras. Started with film, with a Hasselblad for medium format and Canon for 35 millimeter. And then over the years, as we switched to digital and digital got better and better, we would get new cameras.
So I mentioned earlier that we want to take people behind the scenes and show them how we get the wildflowers out in the field. And our intent always when we photograph is to photograph the live flower as it is in the field without disturbing it. So there are basically 3 different ways we photograph the wildflowers. One, you see in the upper left-hand corner of the left page of the book is called a botanical portrait. And the intent with this is to show as much in sharp focus as we can so people can see as much of the detail of the individual blossom or the entire plant that we're photographing.
And we put a white or black background, or sometimes both, to isolate the flower away from a distracting background.
And so after doing this for a while, just showing these stark black or white backgrounds, it became kind of repetitious. And I was wondering, well, is there another way to, show the beauty of these flowers, but still have an interesting background behind them? So I noticed one day a I was looking at the fabric I used behind the flowers and saw, well, there were these folds behind them. And so I said, well, what if I arrange the folds in an artistic, graphic way to complement the overall composition, to complement the beauty of the flowers. So I started doing this, and I called this the Wrap series. And as far as I know, no one else was doing this when I was doing this.
And we had a really funny story from another CMPS chapter member who saw the talk. She happened to be visiting some friends up in Oregon, and her friend had some of the fabric from Christo's running fence. So the next day they went out into the garden and started wrapping flowers in Christo's running fence fabric, which we thought was really fun.
And again, I was looking for yet another way to interpret the beauty of these flowers. So I came up with a way to gently and safely get the wildflower's petals gently in contact with a filter in front of a wide angle lens. I put an extension tube between the camera and the wide angle lens, and that allowed me to focus right up to the very, very front of the lens, because the light that would normally fall on the flower and be reflected off it was being blocked by the lens and the camera. The available light for the photograph was light that was transmitted through the flower, light that was coming from whatever the background was. And so this transmitted light gave the whole appearance to the flower a much softer feel. And I always made sure that there were quite a few elements in the composition that were in sharp focus, so that you could still see details in the flowers. So I call this the contact series. And I was doing this off the tripod. All the botanical portraits were almost always done on a tripod. So with the contact series, I was able to take the camera off the tripod, have a little bit more flexibility, and be a little bit more playful with this contact type of composition.
And this is an example when we were still doing film, and with the Hasselblad, we were doing Polaroids. This image took us the longest. On average, it's about an hour per floral portrait. This one took us 2.5 hours. This was down in Anza Borrego, Desert State Park. And I found the flower the night before, but it was getting too dark. So we came back early in the morning, and the light was coming from the left. So we needed to use fabric and reflectors to bounce light back in. And then a pile of clothes and camera bags to block the light so that it didn't hit the sand or the leaves, making it distracting. And this was the result. For those of you who have seen desert lilies, you know that they're generally fairly tall, about 2 feet tall, sometimes higher, with one stalk and flowers coming off the sides. Well, this one decided it was going to put a lot of energy into flowers and came up with 3 stalks and stayed very short, as you can see in this photograph. We live 5 miles north of the Golden Gate Bridge in Marin City, which is near Sausalito. And Marin County is a great place for biodiversity. From the oceans to the mountains, wet to the
oak woodlands
to the hotter inland areas. And this was a case where we used a piece of plexiglass so that the light could come through it, which gives you a different effect than just a piece of fabric. And I was really fortunate. Not only would Rob carry 65 pounds of equipment, he also was willing to put himself into really uncomfortable positions. And he was a Capricorn, so he had the patience and the willingness to do this. I was called Eagle Eyes as a child because I would find money on the beach. And I have this amazing eyesight where I can my eye-brain connection is really strong and probably very saturated. So I find the flowers really easily. Over time, Rob learned how to find them as well.
But she's still a lot better at finding flowers than I am.
And then I would take a look at the composition and give my feedback as well.
So this project could only have been done with the two of us. We call us Team Sweetie, and it is definitely a very, very collaborative effort.
And we call the photos are his, hers, and ours, mostly ours, as far as the portraits. And we didn't have fancy equipment necessarily to be wind blocks or reflectors. So you can work that way. We just love these checker blooms and how delicate they were.
So as we mentioned earlier, we put black or white backgrounds behind the flowers. And then we'll go home, look at the images and see which ones we like best.
Yeah, because sometimes we'll photograph them with both ways. Over time, we sort of learned which colors might look better with white or black. And sometimes it's really windy. Here up in the Marin Headlands tends to be very windy. And on occasion, we actually had to bring out a photography tent to block the wind.
In this image, I had been looking for a beautiful example of a Franciscan paintbrush that lives in the Bay Area, and we came across this wonderful flower. Like Nita said, it was blowing like crazy, and we were able to get a really nice composition. I was able to get a really nice composition of the entire flower. And as I looked at it more closely, looking at the tip, I saw it just looked like there were flames coming out of red flames coming out of the top of this flower. So we don't always photograph the entire flower. Sometimes we look for some way to abstract the flower to show one aspect of the wildflower's beauty.
So we consider ourselves artists and give ourselves artistic license to photograph them any way we want to. They're not necessarily botanical illustrations in the formal way. We're also very careful about where we photograph, often by the side of the road or the side of a trail, so that we don't create damage to the habitat. And if we can't access a specific flower that we want to photograph without doing damage, we will bypass it and try to find another one. And we also look at different angles. Don't always photograph from the front.
If we didn't mention, all these floral portraits are in our book. And occasionally we'll come across a flower that has a really beautiful scent to it. This is a Western azalea we photographed on Mount Tamalpais in the fog. And it was, you put your nose close to this flower and the scent is just intoxicating. It's so delicate. It's got a very, very prominent and distinct scent to it. So those are one of the benefits of photographing flowers. You not only see their beauty, but you get to have this wonderful scent experience with some of these flowers.
And this was up by Quincy. Somebody had told us that the mountain lady slipper was in bloom and he would take us to him. So we drove all the way up to Quincy to do that. And this is just an example of how I photographed the Shasta iris. It's a very different iris from what we find down here in the Bay Area. And as I mentioned, we try to stay as close to the road or the edge of the trail as possible. And we use diffusion discs often to soften the light, because that allows us to photograph throughout the day, not only in the morning or evening when the light is soft. And in this case, we can also decide where we want the light to be coming from. And in this case, we had it come from behind so that the flower stalk looked like it's lit from within. And then we put a reflector under the camera to fill in the shadows that were created by the diffusion disc.
This is another example of the Wrapped series. I hope you can see that on your individual monitors.
And if you go to our website and you go to the video section, you will see an 8-minute fundraising sampler, an audio description of the sacred datura. We are raising funds to create an audio described version of our project for the visually impaired. So imagine you can't see the flowers. We will try to bring them alive in your mind's eye through our descriptions of what the flower looks like, where it was photographed, how we photographed it, as well as including nature sounds by Bernie Krause of the different environments that are represented. So we encourage you to go check that out. And if you yourself or you know anyone who is able to help support the project, we are a sponsored project of MarinLink and can take tax-deductible donations.
This is another example of how we work out in the field. This is a page in the book in the behind the scenes section. So you can see how we wrap the flowers in the field. This image of a Douglas iris was taken on Ring Mountain, which is probably about 4 miles from us. You can see Mount Tamalpais that I mentioned earlier in the background. This area was preserved because there's a very, very rare lily, the Tiburon mariposa lily, quite a strange looking lily that lives in only a few populations on this mountain and nowhere else in the world.
And we were just up there and there are flowers, but not as many as actually last year, which was surprising. Oops, you want me to go back?
No, that's okay.
This is at 11,000 feet at Morgan Pass. And wrapped the pygmy daisy in order to get rid of the distracting gravel behind it.
On the way back from that hike, we came across this beautiful alpine daisy, and I wrapped it with a different type of fabric than I use now. And at times it would take me longer to arrange the folds in the composition than it would take to find the angle I wanted to photograph the flower. And
right now, what we usually use most of the time is chiffon. Found it to hold the folds really well, but it blows in the wind, so it has to be relatively still day.
We often photograph the flower in both sunlight and diffuse light. Can you go back?
Sure.
In this instance, we looked at the flower closely under sunlight and saw that there were all these beautiful, bright specular highlights on this iris, iris's petals. So we photographed it under sunlight. Then I used a diffusion disc to soften the light and photograph the same flower in almost the exact same composition under the diffuse light. So you can see that there's really quite a difference. And that's why I carry all the equipment I carry, so that we have all these lighting options to show the flower in the best light possible.
I just wanted to go back here. This is also Ring Mountain looking in another direction and later in the year. This is not where we did the irises, but it's got a pretty good growing season there.
Another really frequent question we get asked is how much Photoshop work do you do? Well, everything goes through some image processing software. We photograph in the raw file, in the raw file format. And so that means that the raw data from that raw file has to be converted into visual data, into actual pixels that make up the whole image. So we photographed this image under blue skylight, and the camera's sensor is designed to capture the exact color of the light falling on the scene. The sensor is designed to capture as much of a tonal range from black to white, from shadows to highlights as possible. That creates a very low contrast image. And the camera sensor is also designed to capture as many subtle colors as possible. So the raw image is often a very low saturated image. So in Photoshop, what we do is make the adjustments to bring the image back into how it was that we actually saw what we were photographing. You probably saw in the previous raw image that everything had a blue cast to it. Well, when we converted the image in Photoshop and made the adjustments, everything wanted to be white because we wanted the white flowers to be white flowers and not have a blue cast to them.
And I just wanted to point out that our brain translates that blue light into neutral. So when you're in the shadow and shade, you're not seeing the blue. Your brain changes it, but the camera brings up what's actually there.
Our intent is always to show people what they would see if they had seen the same thing that we were seeing, and accurately represent the true colors of the flowers.
And here's an example where we put a white background behind the flower, but it had wrinkles in it. It had some shadows in it. So we take it into Photoshop and clean up the background.
Bring up the saturation.
And the contrast. And this is a sample of the 2-page spread in the book. We also are dealing with wind and blowing sand at times. This wild buckwheat was really low to the ground, so we snuck some fabric underneath it. We had to use 2 pieces. We also had all the sand that was coming on here. So this is low saturation, low contrast. We bring it into Photoshop. We clean up the background and bring the saturation and contrast back up. And again, the 2-page spread in the book. And so we deal with rain, we deal with heat, we deal with wind. One of the things that fortunately we haven't had to deal with too much in California, except up in the Sierras when we got attacked by mosquitoes, was the no-see-ums that are found in Utah. And many of you may know about them also from the Northeast. They are worse than mosquitoes. They're smaller. They're
really, really tiny.
They're really tiny. They will crawl in your ears, your nose, into your clothes, and their bite is actually worse than mosquitoes. So we got to the point, we were in the middle of nowhere on our way to Taos, New Mexico. And within 3 minutes, the no-see-ums had found us. And I had to go back to the car and go find some clean underwear so that we could keep them out of our ears. And even Rob had to put on my underwear.
So this was really a mystery to both of us. How could the bugs have followed us when we were driving for an hour? How come they showed up when we were there? When we arrived, it looked like there were no bugs there at all. So I did a little bit of research, and I discovered that no-see-ums use the nectar of the flowers for nourishment, but they need an animal's blood to reproduce. So that's why the bugs were there that we didn't see when we arrived, but when we were close to the flowers, the no-see-ums found us.
And we had spent several days in Capitol Reef National Park photographing the wildflowers, and Rob was on the ground and getting eaten alive.
And Nita's was often above me trying to brush the bugs away while I was, meticulously composing the image on a tripod. So, we're fortunate we don't have to deal with this where we live or in most of the areas we've photographed.
And we figured Rob had about 200 bites on him. So we had been photographing throughout the West, and we were invited to create an exhibit that had a California focus in the Jewett Gallery of the San Francisco Main Library. And that was Beauty and the Beast, California Wildflowers and Climate Change. Had 100 images. We also include many of our guidebooks because we weren't experts in identifying all the flowers. We found that binoculars were great to use for finding flowers off in the distance, and also knee pads. We found a photographer up in Mount Rainier who is wearing these wonderful knee pads made by Ergodyne, and they're great for gardening as well as for photography on your knees. And they are like kneeling in stiff jello.
And it made my life so much easier. I could spend so much more time on the ground working over a tripod without my knees really, really hurting. So these were just a blessing to find.
So this is the first exhibit. Then it became a traveling exhibit, half the size, that has been traveling throughout California, and right now is at the Morro Bay Natural History Museum into mid-September. We were also fortunate to be asked by the San Diego Natural History Museum to help them create a custom large print exhibit called California Blooming, Wildflowers and Climate Change in the Golden State. And that was up for almost 2 years. It's now down. And it was a large print version up to 12 feet tall. And we always had text panels that were educational and trying to inspire people to take action around climate change, land conservation, and species extinction. And we wanted to expand on that information. So we decided to work on the coffee table book and have a diversity of voices. People like Jose Gonzalez, who was the founder of Latino Outdoors and wrote a wonderful story about connecting to nature. We had 16 authors, 11 are women, scientists, nature writers, and conservation leaders.
The book is divided into 3 chapters: the gift of beauty, the human connection, and ensuring the future.
And within this chat section, we have a list of 25 things you can do to make a difference. We wanted to not only inspire people to take action, but make it very easy for them to do so. So people like Gordon Lepic wrote about wildflowers and climate change. He's with the Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Ryan Burnett did a really nice short story on phenology, which is the timing of natural events, the timing of how things happen in the seasons. And so his story is about documenting the rufous hummingbird, which has an epic migration from Mexico into the Pacific Northwest and up into Canada. He noted that the bird needed to have the wildflowers blooming at just the right time. The timing of these natural events had to be precise for the bird to have flowers on its migration to fuel its migratory flight to its breeding grounds.
And it's with climate change, they're finding that it's really disrupting this timing, and they're finding fewer and fewer rufous hummingbirds.
So that image in the book was the luckiest image in the whole 30 years we've been photographing. We were photographing this beautiful scarlet fritillary and upper Table Rocks BLM land in Oregon. Tall flowers are more susceptible to moving in the slightest breeze. So we were waiting there for quite a while for the breeze to die down and capture the flower. I happened to be looking through the viewfinder at the time when this bird flew in. I got 2 frames and the bird was gone. So on the right, you see what the raw file was that we captured, and you see that this was how we processed the image in Photoshop to bring the image back to how it was we saw it.
So we encourage people to learn about the plants that are needed for pollinators. Susan Twite wrote a wonderful story about the 5 deserts in California. Most people only know about 4 of them.
Most people don't know that in the southern San Joaquin, there's what scientists have defined as the San Joaquin Desert.
Robin Wall Kimmerer, many of you may know her from her book, Braiding Sweetgrass. She's a Native American botanist and professor, and she wrote this wonderful story about the naming of flowers. Wendy Takuda, when she retired from doing news anchor work, she got into restoration work, and Zen and the Art of Pulling Broom is a very funny story about her volunteer work. Amber Paris talking to children about climate change without scaring them. And Genevieve Arnold with the Theodore Payne Foundation. She is in charge of their seed banking.
There's also a section in the book devoted to fire followers, fire recovery, fire ecology. This is a beautiful fire poppy that we found in Cleveland National Forest after a fire had gone through in the Santa Ana Mountains.
Also photographed fire recovery in Lake County in a number of different places. This is back into Santa Ana Mountains. So different ecosystems recover differently.
I'm sorry. This whole area had been burned. This is BLM land. It's on the Redbud Trail in Lake County, and the fire had just destroyed this whole area. What comes back often are a lot of the bulb plants.
And what's interesting is that this is only 6 months after the fires, and this is how much growth was happening just 6 months afterwards.
This whole area had been completely burned. This scene was just completely scorched, and this is what came back. And the Clarkia, we've learned, come back in abundance after a wildfire.
So as Rob mentioned, the bulbs, the ash becomes really good fertilizer. The burned out overstory gives them the light that they need. And some plants actually need the chemistry from both the smoke and the ash in order to germinate. This is a field that had been completely burned, so there's no thatch left. Just beautiful.
This is Pepperwood Preserve in Sonoma County. You can see in the upper left that this area had been burned. This was what came back afterward. Nita found these flowers in Pepperwood, these two flowers right next to each other. We didn't place them there, so we photographed them because it was such a beautiful color contrast.
We're going to take you through some of the favorite areas in the desert during superblooms. Initially, Death Valley. And one of the reasons we like Death Valley and the deserts is that the geology is more exposed, and plants just come out of what you think is nothing. And you may not see anything. There was superblooms down in the valley, but if you look closely enough, you can find things like the desert broom rape that was in among the gravel. Look even closer, you might find insects as well. 1992, our first super 98, excuse me, was our first super bloom, what they called 100-year bloom back then in the deserts. And they changed it to super blooms because of climate change, they were happening more often. Joshua Tree National Park during a super bloom.
We often find interesting ground details where the flowers seem to be coming out of where they shouldn't. The Joshua Tree has a lot of granite in it, so the granite weathers into these coarse granitic soils, and it's beautiful to see these beautiful flowers coming out of this coarse texture in the background. On a normal year, this desert canterbury bells grows about this tall, and they're scattered very sparsely throughout a desert wash. Well, in 1998 in Joshua Tree in the Cottonwood Wash, there was so much rain, these desert canterbury bells grew abundantly, and the rain lasted for so long that the flowers grew a lot taller. So you'd see more blossoms on the stalks of these taller than usual flowers.
And we would go out for 3 to 4 weeks at a time to photograph. And we just love the diversity in shapes and colors, size of California's and the Western wildflowers. Anza Borrego was one of our favorite areas. Things have really changed with social media. When we used to go, there would be a few thousand people in the whole park. Now there are tens of thousands, if not more. And so it's a different experience than it used to be.
These are all images in the book.
Here's a 2-page spread with a desert chicory from a different angle than you would normally see it. And it's about the size of a dandelion. Rare fog in the desert. We had some rain 9 out of 12 days we were there.
In Ansel Borrego. And this is where it all started in 1992 in the Antelope Valley, California Poppy Reserve. This was done with a digital camera, probably about 12 or 13 years ago, a different view, and you can see some interesting ground details. There's always nice to see how many different flowers you can find on the ground. This is the cover of the book. We photographed it after our very, very favorite super bloom we talked about earlier near the town of Gorman. We decided we'd take a quick trip to the Poppy Reserve after while the storm was clearing, and you can see that there are just only California poppies. You don't see this great diversity of flowers that I showed you in the beginning of the slideshow in the Poppy Reserve.
I'm going to take you quickly through our native plant garden. This cedar waxwing was photographed from our bedroom window. It is not on a native plant. It's on a rather nasty invasive called cotoneaster. And we've cut it down since, but made sure it still had berries. These are the toyons.
Yeah.
It's the toyon bush that grows at the bottom of our driveway that attracts a lot of different birds. If you want to know what kind of plants to plant in your own garden that's good for your area, Calscape, the California Native Plant Society website, has a garden planner for you so you can find out what's best for your area. So we plant for the monarchs. We put in narrowleaf, we put in narrowleaf milkweed, and we got the caterpillars. That's about 13 days later. We brought a couple of them in so that they could cocoon inside, and then we released them. And this is the biggest dragonfly I have ever seen, was hanging out on the milkweed. The flowers. It brings in a lot of different insects. These are the seeds from the milkweed. And milkweeds like to spread. So if you plant them in an area, make sure you give them room because they're going to start spreading. These are a few other flowers in our garden. Ceanothus is particularly wonderful for the pollinators, and it has a wonderful scent as well. And if you take a really, really, really close look at those tiny flowers, this is what you might see. And there's little pieces of pollen. If you want later flowers, the California fuchsia is really good for later in the season. Pacific aster is another one that's good for spreading. So the reason for the project was to introduce people to flowers, but also encourage them to make a difference. So these are a number of different things you can do in order to help out the flowers as well as deal with climate change.
And we've got more images of the book that we'll show you right after this.
And iNaturalist and Nature's Notebook are great places for you to become familiar with becoming a citizen scientist and really helping scientists all over the world with the data that you can help upload.
Some of the images in the book, some of the flowers in the book were taken out of state but that species lives in California as well. So we decided to include it if we hadn't photographed it in California. We often look for interesting backgrounds. There's a beautiful serpentine boulder in the background behind this blue dix that we found in the Sierra foothills.
Table Mountain's one of our favorite places to go. It's become quite inundated with people. So if before you go, check on what the rules are. I think that they have changed it to protect it a little more. There's the mountain lady slipper that we drove all the way to Quincy for. And these are just some of the two-page spreads in the book. There's 190 images in the book. So we're just giving you a little bit of an insight. Plantid.net is a great website, especially for beginners for IDing plants. There's also a lot of apps now for your phones. CalFlora is more in-depth, more advanced. Theodore Payne Foundation is a great resource as far as wildflower reports. Every Friday, they update their wildflower report, so you can find out. Also, as you know, CNPS Facebook page and desertusa.com. And again, we just love the diversity found in the different types of flowers and the shapes and the sizes. Native orchids. In the exhibit and in the book, there's a map of the 14 ecological regions of California. California is it's a really special place. In the book is a glossary because there are a lot of terms that are used that people may not be familiar with. There are two indices. One is a plant index and another is location index. So we have a regular edition book, which has the same content as the deluxe signed limited edition book. That comes in with a special cover, a signed and numbered tip-in page, and a clamshell box for it. And if you get access to the regular edition book, we encourage you to pull back the paper jacket on the cover, and this is the special cover underneath it. So again, we'd love your help to make Nature's Beauty accessible to the visually impaired and also those who have reading barriers or can't get out into nature. Tax-deductible donations can happen through marinlink.org. And feel free to contact us, send us emails, give us a call. All that information is on our website on wildflowerbooks.com.
Now that's it. Nita and I want to thank you for staying with us. We're an hour and 1 minute. And as Nita mentioned earlier, you can purchase books at wildflowerbooks.com.
And also have access to other resources and videos.
And we like to end with this wonderful quote by David Brower. Truth and beauty can still win battles. We need more art, more passion, and more wit in defense of the earth. Oh, thank you for watching our Beauty and the Beast, California Wildflowers and Climate Change presentation.
Yes, thank you.
Are there any questions?
We are looking at your chat
First of all,
box.
Yeah. Before we go into the questions, I just want to say thank you so much. And you can see that the thank yous are pouring in on the chat. I want to start with a question that Greg asked, and that is, do you have photos exemplifying the beast's effects on flowers?
Yes.
How do you represent that?
Oh, no. Do
We
they
have
exemplify?
Do we have photos of them? We have photographed some invasive species. We don't have a lot of them. It's it's not like photographing glaciers that you can see receding, because we have such range of deluge and drought. It becomes a little more difficult to photograph it. I mean, if you go and you could photograph the burned, which we haven't, but the fires in the Joshua Tree National Park, you can see how millions of Joshua trees have burned partially because of climate change, or slowly or significantly because of climate change, and the invasive species that can get it established when there's more rain, such as the non-native grasses that burn a lot more than
And a
the
lot
native,
hotter.
and a lot hotter than the native grasses, therefore killing off a lot more of the Joshua trees. Did you want to add to that? Or? And also
I
the other
appreciate
thing is development or desertification. We've had taken pictures in Antelope Valley where there's desertification because of either poor farming practices or development, where the soil is disappearing.
Right. To what extent have you seen evidence of, as you were just alluding to there, habitat shift, ecotype shifts, where areas that were meadows or were grasslands have suffered from desertification, and where when areas burn, they don't come back as the same ecotype.
Yeah, especially if the fires are too hot. It can fuse the soil and all the water runs off, and it becomes really hard for anything to grow back. We sort of rely on the scientists to give us information and people information about what's actually happening with the climate change, because they're the ones who are the experts who are studying it. But we do see some of the results, certainly more fires, hotter fires that can affect the habitats. And in some cases, the fires, as we showed, are really good for the wildflowers. In other cases, it destroys all of the natural habitat.
How soon after a wildfire would you want to go photograph? And would you go photograph season after season? If you wanted to see that change, the post-wildfire recovery, the different plant arrays that happened during that recovery period, when would you go?
Well, as we showed, 6 months, there'd been good rains in Napa, in Lake County. So 6 months afterwards, there was an amazing wildflower bloom. If there hadn't been much rain that year, there may not have been much. We've been in areas that had burned 2 years before, and there were wonderful wildflowers. So it would be wonderful if somebody would set up a camera in the same place year after year. That would be one way of showing how the recovery happens.
One way we learn where to go when is by contacting like members in CNPS chapters where there have been a fire in their chapter area. I mean, CNPS members, as you know, are always going out and reporting back what they've seen. So we always rely on, the experience, the information that other people have to determine where we're going to go when to photograph what.
And CNPS the state office did a lot of calls for information and images and research on fire followers. Yes. So CNPS was doing a lot of research in that area. And I wonder if they may have put out a publication. I don't know. At least I know they put out articles.
Are we going to answer?
I think that's a great idea. I remember once we went up to Glacier one summer, and as we entered the park, I asked the ranger at the station there, I said, so if we want to go really see wildflowers, where should we go? And he said, the areas that burned. And he showed us on the map where those places were. And he was so right. They were by far the most colorful places in those mountains. So
One thing I wanted to bring up just before we answer some more questions is just to let you know, this is a hefty coffee table book. It is 5.5 pounds. So it's about the same price as salmon, I think, by the pound.
so we get a couple when we do a workout. Okay.
Right. And it took us 3 months to get the printing the way we wanted to. So we were very happy with the final result. And we've been getting wonderful feedback from people.
We answering all the questions. Let's see.
The Beast Effect.
Well, there was a question very early on. And
We have
I
yeah,
have one. Do we have another book in the works? A different focus?
yes.
Well, right now we're working on raising funds to do the audio described book for the visually impaired. And then that can be used both in live presentations as well as audio books that will be available for the general public, but also for those who are visually impaired. And we look to get it into the Library of Congress because they reformat books for the blind.
But as far as, do we have another physical book in the works? No.
But I want to do some children's books
Yeah.
around wildflowers and naming wildflowers and that type of
Yeah.
thing. But a big coffee table book. It took us 3 years to put this together, and it's a major commitment and over $100,000 actually to put it together.
Well, I do like the idea of the children's book. Dana said, stunningly beautiful. I'd like to share a book with my underserved children in East Palo Alto schools. 43% of these kids qualify as homeless and 90% live under the poverty line. They would be blown away by seeing and being exposed to such beautiful flowers. And for you, Nita, it sounds like this would be the coming together of your attention to the children and your attention to the wildflowers.
Absolutely. So Dana, contact us. We do have the videos. There's a video on our website, the one that we gave for the California Historical Society. So it depends on the age of the children as to what their attention span is. But yeah, I'd love to talk to her, and if she wants to contact us, there's your email, Dana. Okay, let me copy that. And I'm going to put in here also my email address and Rob's, and how you can reach us.
So while Nita's doing that, Rob, someone earlier had a question when you were showing the desert candle and talking about your love for that plant. Does the desert candle bloom only in years that are wet?
I don't know the answer to that question. I don't. There's at Cal Flora, you could probably find out when the plants bloom, and I would imagine that I mean, this is my guess. I would imagine that there are different intensities of the flowers blooming on different years, but my guess is they would bloom every year unless there's not enough rain. But I'm not the person to ask. We always ask everyone else those questions. So sorry, I can't.
Perfect.
Yeah, we say we are experts at photographing them, but not experts at identifying them or the science behind them.
So I'm sorry, I can't be more helpful to answer your question.
That's great. That's great. So when you have a challenge like that, okay, here's a plant. We're not sure which species it is. We're not sure if it's a spore. We don't know everything that we want to know about it. What do you two do?
Well, we have guidebooks, as Nita showed in our exhibit. I have a whole stack of different guidebooks. So we go to the guidebooks first. I mean, I'm sure a lot of you have guidebooks, and you go to color or.
Actually, these days we cheat and we go to our friend Sue Mazer and we send her a picture and say, "What's this?"
Well, that's for something regional,
Right.
We had a friend, Ted Kipping, who passed away, who was this amazing amateur botanist. He was a tree person, and he had quite an extensive knowledge of not only California plants, but US plants. He traveled around the world, and he knew a lot. He knew people to ask if he didn't know. And so there's a whole network of people. There are people probably in UC Berkeley that could help you identify plants. It's just finding people. So we always depend on someone else when we run into something we can't absolutely identify.
And then I'm also reposting your YouTube channel because somebody had asked about YouTube.
So I
posting
put the link for that in earlier, but I appreciate you putting it in now. Absolutely. And it won't, we will get this up there in the next couple of days. It'll, they can stream it now, but I figure people who are streaming it are watching it, but we will put the recording up there within the next couple of days. Let's see here. What in terms of the photography, for people who, I know this is going to sound like a simple question, and you're going to go, but I don't do that. And that is for people who have an iPhone. Would you have any advice for them on how to take better pictures of California wildflowers?
Well, one thing is always be aware of the background. You can either put something in there if you don't like the background, or some cameras have portrait mode, which will make the background blurrier. So it won't be distracting.
And you can, people can buy attachments to put over the lens of the camera that allows them to focus more closely, so you can get more of a macro effect. The problem I've found with iPhone photography is that I can't control the depth of field. I was photographing a flower up on Ring Mountain in front of this really beautiful serpentine rock that had just a wonderful texture and color. And the iPhone kept photographing on the detail. I mean, kept noticing the detail of the background and not the flower. And it was just driving me crazy because I would try to make the phone focus right on the flower itself, and it kept switching to this texture that it was designed to get. So iPhone macro photography can be really, really challenging. And that's why when I'm doing iPhone photography, I usually, put something like a black background behind it, so that the detail of the flower is what the camera sensor is really picking up and focusing on, as opposed to just the sort of blank black or white background.
And you just discovered on your iPhone 12 that if you hold your finger down on the photo, it'll create a black background. And that works in some situations, but not in others.
What I found is if the flower is sharp and what's behind it isn't really sharp, if I put my finger on the part of the image where the flower is, you'll see,
hold it down.
And hold it down, the camera will select the flower, and then it asks me, do I want to copy it or do I want to share it? And so what it does is it extracts that part, the part that's in focus, the part that's the flower, it extracts it. And then if you want to share it, it puts a black background behind what it has extracted, and then you can share that. But That's as much as I've learned. I don't do a lot of really serious iPhone macro photography. I do it sometimes because I'm lazy and I don't have my camera with me, but if I'm really serious about something, then I'll take my camera out with a macro lens and all the other stuff that I carry. Hope that's helpful.
Oh, it definitely is. It definitely is. Yeah, when I went to Carrizo Plain a couple of weeks ago, I took my digital single lens reflex, and I also took my iPhone with my new little macro lens.
Oh, you got one, really?
I did. Yeah. I'll tell you, but I won't tell the group because I don't want to advertise brands, but I'll happily let you know the brand that I got.
Okay.
And I'll send you a couple pictures from it, and you
I'd
can
love it. Thank
decide.
you.
Yeah, yeah. So when was the last time that you all were at Ansel Borrego, and how have you found that?
It's been a long was it your 50th birthday? Was that the last time we were there?
No, it was after that. It was 2005.
Okay,
With-
yeah, that's been a while.
Oh,
Yeah.
right, 2005. So it's
Yeah.
it's been quite a while. And as I mentioned, well, we like to spread out to different places. We've gone to Arizona. We hear Arizona is great this year. There are parts of Arizona that are having super blooms. And if you go to desertusa.com, you can look at different states as well as California. So we try to cover different areas, and then also with the crowds now, it's not quite the same experience that it used to be.
It's true.
If you go
Yes.
to Ansel Borrego, we recommend you go to the southern end of the park if you have the time.
Okay.
Or you have four-wheel drive where you can get.
No, I mean
off.
the northern end of the park has Henderson Canyon.
Yeah, I'm talking about, but you have the crowds. I'm saying if you want to get away
Well-
from people, we did it. We would go down to the southern end and have great blooms and not see any.
But I don't know that you can do that anymore.
Why not?
I mean, well, because it's probably all overrun with people. That's my guess.
Too many people everywhere. Yeah.
Difference of
That I
opinion.
can.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess
We don't
we'll
mind.
just
We
have-
don't mind there being a lot of people. We just don't like it when they are doing their selfies in the middle of the flowers and trampling them. We got cursed out the other day, because we mentioned that a couple were walking right through the flowers when they could have easily walked around them. And he was just so nasty. It was like, whoa. We were just saying you could walk around them. You don't have to walk through them. But
yeah, it's very true. So I think that does it for the questions.
Julie's been giving us a little bit of a report on Ansel Borrego. Because it's been cool and raining on and off, the bloom is still lasting. And she said her friends near Ansel Borrego say that there have not been the crowds of people this year, which is interesting.
That is great. This is the first time in several years I've heard. I personally know several different people who who don't know each other, who've gone down there. So I was just assuming it was crowded. But I have to say, I'm hoping that all of the publicity about Antelope Valley having been so overrun last time, and warning people to avoid that perhaps it has that publicity has slightly decreased the number of people going there.
Right. Yeah, we hope so too.
Yeah.
Because
Well,
one thing we noticed, was that when we spend so much time with one flower, every individual of every species has a unique value, and it's not the whole species concept. And if there's just a few of them, somehow it's more valuable. It's like every individual, like every human has his and her own unique value. Well, every individual of every species deserved its right to fulfill its own existence. You mentioned you went to Whidbey Island. Well, I went to Whidbey Island and attended this wonderful conference on deep ecology. And what deep ecology was, it just emphasized the value of the individual, the individual rights of every living species, of every living individual. And so, like I said, when we spend an hour with a flower, you just realize that it's that individual that's giving us this beauty, and we respect its right to exist and fulfill its ability to create more through its own procreative process. So that's our philosophy.
And Rob actually kisses the flower afterwards and says thank you.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that is just magnificent. And I'm not sure that we could do better than that as parting words, unless you have some other parting words, but that is really inspirational. Well, I want to say thank you so much to you, Rob and Nita, and thank you everybody who came this evening, and thank you everybody who is going to watch this later on YouTube. We really appreciate your caring so much about the native plants. And there's Julie once again saying, oh, that's so sweet that you kiss the flowers.
Well, one reason I started doing that was because after photographing the flower, I wanted to touch the petal and see gently what it felt like, because different petals, some are stiff and some are very delicate. And I found that with some really delicate petals, my finger wasn't sensitive enough to actually get a feeling, to get a sensation. But I know that our lips are some of the most, have some of the greatest sensitivity to touch. So I said, well, what if I touch it with my lips? I could feel it better. So then I said, well, I might as well give it a kiss and say thank you. So that's where that all started.
Also, I'm adding, oops, I forgot. I'm adding an exhibit envoys URL. So if you know anywhere in your areas, because the exhibit has not been in the foothills, that might want to host the exhibit, let us know. And also encourage you to have your local library contact us about having the book, because we know it can be expensive for some people, and some people don't even have coffee tables, as we've been told. And so libraries are always a good resource for the book as well.
I think that's a great idea. I have on several occasions requested from our library an interlibrary loan of a photography focused book about native plants that they were quite expensive. And so I was like, I don't know yet if I want to buy it, because I haven't seen it. And even if our library didn't have it, they would arrange somewhere in the state for an interlibrary loan, and it would arrive. So I'll definitely do that.
The Earth Store has the book in Nevada City, as well as Harmony Books.
Oh, thank you very much. I really appreciate that.
Remember that they are both carrying the books.
Okay. Yes. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. That is terrific. So Exhibit Envoy, this is how people would reach out if they have an idea for a place where the exhibit that you have now, that's through September, that they could arrange to have it be where they live. The one that's at Net.
Yeah, if you go to that exhibit to that website and go to exhibits, we are in the second row. I think there's a poppy there, and you can click on that. It describes the exhibit, what type of space is needed. And then down below, you can see where it's going. It's going to Reading next year. And where if you go to past locations, you can see where it's been, and that gives you an idea of the type of places. So they're natural history museums, they're history museums, they're libraries. There's a number of different types of locations.
Wonderful. Well, we wish you all the best in your next endeavors.
Thank
And
you.
thank you so much for spending the evening with us.
Oh,
Our
we enjoyed
pleasure.
it. Thank
Our
you.
pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Good night, everybody.